Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this evening of ASAL readings. My colleague Mandy Tregus will explain what that is in a moment. My name is Nicholas Jose, and I want to welcome everyone who's here in the room with us at the University of Adelaide, and all of those who are in virtual rooms joining us on Zoom. This is the last event of an extraordinary 3-day journey through southern waters, the last cascade we go over. So hold on tight or just let it wash over you. But first up, I'd like to ask Rosemary Wanganeen to welcome us to her country. Rosemary is the founding CEO of the Healing Centre for Griefology and currently a master's student in social sciences at this university. So please, Rosemary.
So thank you so much for that introduction, and Mandy, thank you so much for inviting me here to do Welcome to Country. So it's always an honour and a privilege to perform Welcome to Ghana Country, as it gives me an opportunity to acknowledge my Ghana ancestry on my dad's side, and on my mum's side, Gulgatha and Wirrungulf, and that's from the west coast of South Australia. So when performing Welcome to Country, I love to bring an educational component and for it to be interactive. For example, let me first explain the meaning of the Ghana words, and then I'll formally welcome you. And because you are a group of people, I'll be doing a group Ghana welcome. So I'll ask you Namani, and Namani simply means, are you all well? And you'll respond with Mani Adlu. And I have a couple of images to help you remember. So instead of money, it's Mani. And steel is not soft, is it? It's hard. And you can probably imagine the last one. Lu. So you string those all together, you have Mani Adlu. And you're saying back to me, we are all well. So I'm about to formally, it can be a bit hard to see all the way over there. So you're simply saying to me, we are all well. So I'm about to formally ask you Namani, and I invite you to remember those 3 images. So on behalf of my Ghana ancestry, my ancestors, Namani. Fantastic. So continuing with the educational component, the City Centre of Adelaide, Tandanya is the Ghana word for place of the red kangaroo. And traditional Ghana culture, as with all traditional Aboriginal cultures across the continent, was highly intelligent and can claim to be a complete civilization. So the word civilization means an advanced state of human society in which a high level of art, science, religion, and government has been reached. So these systems is what was in place when 1788 arrived here. But it's really difficult to see them because we didn't have infrastructure, courthouses, universities, factories. but to know that traditional Aboriginal culture was very structured and, as I said, highly intelligent, where they had to design cultures like this, not just to survive, but to thrive. So we had science and technology, aquaculture, we had a health system, ecology, fish traps, population control. So all of those systems was in place. So we science and technology around, you know, designing boomerangs and spears. And many more aren't aware that Kaurna country is far and wide. So if you imagine a wheel with 9 spokes and the city of Adelaide is the hub, these spokes approximately extended to the following places: Crystal Brook, which is about 2 hours north of Adelaide, then back down in a southeasterly direction into Clare, which is about 1.5 hours from Adelaide, into Gawler, follow the foothills of the Mount Lofty Ranges, and continuing in a southerly direction to the south coast to the Fleurieu Peninsula into Cape Jervis, which is about 1.5 hours from Adelaide. And to complete the circle, we'll turn around and head north up the Gulf of St. Vincent, bypass Adelaide, Port Wakefield, Port Broughton, and then back into Crystal Brook. So that's Kaurna country. Furthermore, many aren't aware that the top of Mount Lofty Ranges is the country of the Piramonk people. So my welcomes always acknowledges my gratitude for the sharing of modern Australia. However, I also acknowledge my deepest sadness for the human cost to us as Aboriginal people for this sharing, and that our Aboriginal ancestors never surrendered sovereignty to their traditional lands, seas, and much of their civilisation, but realising and I hope it'll always be we, have a right, a role and a responsibility to be a part of the reconciliation process. In so doing, recognising each other's humanity so that we can move forward as one nation to a place of equity, justice, and in partnership together as contemporary Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal Australians for the health and well-being of our future generations under our Great Southern Cross. It warms my heart to know that many Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal people began a reconciliation process in the mid-20th century. So we, their descendants, can be together like this to be able to say in the 21st century, we have come a long way, but yes, we have some ways to go. So when we walk upon Kaurna country, our Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal ancestors ask us to tread ever so gently, but not just upon Kaurna country, but the whole of our continent, because our nation of Australians have many cultural identities. And as we journey through life, let's recognise each other's humanity, but tread even more gently upon Mother Earth, because this is her home and all living things are just visitors passing through. Thank you again, Mandy, for the invitation, and I'll excuse myself ever so quietly, but I wish you all the best for the symposium. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Rosemary, for your gracious welcome to this land, which we all acknowledge has not been ceded. And we recognise the cost and the custodianship that Kaurna people have held over this country so long. This is an ASAL patrons reading, and I was talking with the president of ASAL, which is the Association for the Study of Australian Literature, this week about who this patron was. I've been a member of ASAL for a long time, and she said, well, we wanted to get patrons. We were hoping people would sponsor things, you know, public events, lectures on Australian writing, but we never quite did. But the way they've done it is the Copyright Agency has been funding them for some years now. Because in COVID times, it's been very difficult to organise travel and accommodation, people moving across states and things. Last year, ASAL initiated a thing where they'd have readings instead. So there are still some lectures, but readings where, you know, writers who aren't going to festivals and aren't selling quite so many books and that sort of thing could come and read. And so graciously, a number of writers have agreed to do that tonight. There's one who zoomed in from France, which is fabulous, Tara June Lynch. And so this is being sponsored by ASAL through the Copyright Agency. That funding is tonight.
We're delighted to have such an incredible lineup of readings this evening. It's a great honour that these writers have made the time and the space to be with us tonight. So thank you for that. Our first reader is Lucy Traore. So please, Lucy, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me along tonight. It's a great pleasure and honour. I've got family all over South Australia, and even though I live in Melbourne, I feel a great sense of connection here. And I'm back here for the first time for 8 months, and I drove across the border and I thought, oh, I'm home. Tears came to my eyes. I love it. I'd just like to acknowledge first that we're on Kaurna land, that I write on Wurundjeri land, and this talk is set in Ngarrindjeri land. And a little background, this is from early in the book, which is about a settler family, a colonial family, an invading family on the Coorong in the 1850s and their early time then. Papa had brought one load of new timber down the stock route from the hills when building the house, but twice it had overturned in the ruts and he would not contemplate it again. Hard work would find us the materials. We fell to scavenging for wood on the peninsula. After a storm, the boys walked miles up and down the sea beach. Small lengths, broken pieces and driftwood were for the fire. Longer lengths from the wrecked ships that had gone down hereabouts were prized. A terrible labour though. They had to be rowed back, and if there was too much, the boat wallowed and seemed likely to drown. Albert was sturdy for a boy of 10. He and Fred worked together, searching and dragging back pieces they could manage to the point opposite our house. And Hugh and Stanton loaded the boat and rowed back and forth with their shabby treasure. Curved pieces from the ship's sides were weighted to dry flat. Straight bits, which Papa said were from decking or walls, were best. They had been planed smooth, fairly smooth at any rate. He showed me other places in the house where shipwrecked timber that he and Hugh and Stanton had found last winter and spring had been used. It was curious to walk through the house and know that so much of it had once been afloat. And when the house sighed and shifted in the cold of the night, it was easy to imagine that we were at sea ourselves, that whales and sharkfish were passing beneath us with a lazy roll of their backs along the belly of the house. And on a windy night, that sails above were catching the driven air and we were slicking through water. And on a still night, that we were anchored in the limitless sea to stop us foundering on the rocks. All through the winter storms, we were on top of each other, and all about us was disorder, and the big boys swearing they'd get more sleep out with the bullocks. The baby screamed until Hugh said, "Cut her gums and save us all, Papa." "Don't," I said. "I'll mind her at night. Think of Louisa." Hugh was quiet at night, and I remembered that Louisa had been a favourite of his. Papa said it was a fever, the same as Georgie's. I said, "I'll take her and keep her quiet. The tooth's nearly through." Papa agreed. So then it was Addie and Mary and me, all in that one bed in our narrow room. Often during those colourless hours, I rose to her cries and walked her from front door to back until she slept again. As busy as we were collecting wood and caulking the gaps in the walls and battening the roof to withstand the wind sting, we didn't notice that the Ngarrindjeri had gone, only that by June we had none of us noticed any for some time. "They've seen that we mean to stay," Hugh said. Papa was hopeful. We have given them no reason to leave. They may yet return. We shall see. Mamma's spirits shifted about, lifting at the thought of Naranjeri having gone, falling at her situation. The space unnerved her. She kept to the parlour and its reminders of her old life, only smiling obediently at Papa when he came to sit with her each day. We have extended the fence towards the stock route, he might say. And she would nod. Oh, yes. Which will prevent the cattle straying so far. Yes, I suppose so. She plucked at the fringes of the velvet cushions and shrugged deeper into her shawl. She took a turn about the room as if she'd decided on a purpose and went to the kitchen door and stared at the lagoon or stood at the parlour window, gazing onto the track up the grassy slope, as if hopeful that someone might come visiting, despite the hour being advanced, and there being no company of any kind, suitable or not. We rowed her across to the peninsula one day, thinking to divert her, and even persuaded her up a tall sand hill. At the summit, she turned around and looked as far off as she could, as far off as she could see along the waves of sand and water and sky, and the light splintering across it all, and shuddered. Please let us go back now, she said. Just a little longer. Come see, I want to show you something, Fred said. But she became agitated, and she would not thereafter be removed from the mainland side of the lagoon and its closeness to the stock route. It was the slender cords that connected her. I held on to the thought myself and had to believe that I would travel it one day with Mamma, and we would return to our old life. Still, I liked the peninsula. No one knew what we did there, throwing ourselves down the sides of hills with our skirts held high and drawers showing, running after the gnawing waves and screaming away when they reached for us. I leapt across a snake once when running down a hill, across its unnatural diagonal movement, and at the bottom laughed that I had cheated death. We persevered with school. Fred began to record the natural environment of the Coorong, and he brought plants and flowers and insects to the table, which he would draw and describe in his notebook after he had done with his lessons, a task he disappeared into so completely that he hardly heard his name. Addie looked at the sentence I had set her to parse and stuttered her pencil on the table. Why must I do this, Hester? I'll never use it. You might. Women are in great need of a well-furnished mind, as great a need of a well-furnished mind as men. That is only what Mamma and Grandmama say. Minnie says no man likes an educated woman. Minnie was Addie's friend in Adelaide. We were all familiar with her many opinions. But parsing a sentence, Hester, how does that help? I began a new topic in Davison's system of practical mathematics. Inside that neat and predictable world, my circumstances became illusory. There was a great deal in it that could have a practical application for Papa, if he would but listen. Truly, I believe that mathematics saved me that first winter, that and the pianoforte, which I do not know how we came to bring. It had value and it might have been sold. Perhaps Mamma insisted, though she had so little of insistence left in her. It was sleek and large, pushed up against the shipwreck wall, and was hardly to be believed. Finally, in spring, there was sufficient wood to build an addition to the house, a bigger room for Addie and me, and another for the boys, so they had 2 rooms, each with 2 beds. But the wood was not quite dry, and as by day the house drew in dust and grass seeds and insects and heat, by night it released the sea, salty, briny, the breath of the deep, thin at first, then thickening and souring as it dried. I thought of the people who might have died inside the wood, clawing for escape, or reaching for it to save them, or who were washed from it or dragged from it by fish and eaten. Was it any wonder that sometimes I shrank from its walls? Papa built me a little shelf by my bed in the new bedroom where I might put a lamp and read. When I took the lamp into my room on the first night, the light fell on a word, Sal, a name, I suppose. scratched into the wood, and I wondered who it might be. Was it a girl, Sally, leaving her mark, or a sailor's or passenger's sweetheart, a whole name and nickname? Did the ship go down before the word was finished? I showed it to Addie, and she made a game of hunting for other signs around the house. The thought of a person having been close by in another time was peculiar, as if days or years or deaths long past were no more than another room that we might walk into. Sometimes Sal was more real to me than anything. I wondered about her, wanting as I was for friendship. She was short and dark and lively, as I imagined her, kinder than Addie, less selfish, but with a quick tongue and fond of dancing. She thought me too bookish and looked out to sea, not at anything here. Her skin took the sun, turning dusky, and her eyes were pale as a calm sea close to shore, like the sea glass I found one day among the shells. Mama said it was rare. Who knew where it had come from or where it had been? I also kept a piece of driftwood which was differently transformed. It had turned to silk and weighed nothing at all. When I stroked it against my cheek, it was like the touch of another. It was my purpose to travel one day as those objects had. Only I hoped I would have more will, more power than a bottle thrown from a ship at sea or a twig washed from a distant shore.
Our next reader is Jennifer Mills. Jennifer, please come up. Please, everyone, welcome Jennifer Mills.
I'm going to read a couple of short extracts from Dyschronia that are in the voice of the chorus that flows through the book. Thank you for the invitation to this symposium. It's been actually lovely to revisit this novel in the context of other work, so I really appreciate the invitation. It's a hot morning, strange for the season. There's a smell in the air we don't recognize, and it wakes us in our beds. Initially, it's almost pleasant, ammoniac and slightly sweet, a bit like a hospital after the cleaner's been. We get up and peer out windows, merely intrigued, but when we open those windows and inhale the full force of it, we know something's not right. Under the bleach, there's another deeper smell, seething like an infection. We pull on our clothes, sniffing the fabric. We check the kitchen, look in on pets, gaze down at our own suspect bodies. It's not us. It's coming from outside. We get in our cars and go down to the water. We don't know why we go that way, only that everybody else has made the same dreamy decision. We drive slowly, looking from car to car and into mirrors at each other, smiling odd, still waking smiles, trying to keep a calm camaraderie. But soon enough, we have to wind up the windows and concentrate. Our children in the back seat, still half asleep, the dog's snout pressed urgently against the window we won't open. The land spreads out on either side, flat and sandy and unaltered, the dull hills watchful in the rearview mirror. When we get down to the shore, to the car park on its jut of rock, we pull our handbrakes, open our doors, and cover our mouths with our sleeves. Someone retches. We blink against a burning in our eyes. Some of us are briefly blinded. We close car doors, we stand at the edge, we try to look out over the beach. We all hear how quiet it is, but some of us think the quiet is weird, and some of us don't think anything at all. We squint at the sand, expecting the usual shallows, seagulls, weeds. There's a strange painterly quality in the light. There are birds down there, but they aren't right either. They shouldn't be crows or this busy. The light, however admirable, is all wrong. The sun shines too brightly, giving the scene a strange exposure. There's too much sand. The birds are stark shadows, attacks without pattern. The sun has misjudged things. This much clarity is in poor taste. Gradually, the smell is revealed as if the clear light marks it out as visible against the beach. The details build a complex of memories: bait left out in summer, maggot roadkill, freezer failure, vinegar, and finally, our asphalt squid. With that last, we realise what it is we're looking at. The light isn't shimmering off the sea like it's supposed to. The light is bouncing off hard, still sand and something else, many things, slick and lumpish things. How do we see what we can't imagine? Down on the beach, there are bodies, hundreds, maybe thousands of them. The bodies are all sizes, lying like pieces of raw chicken on the sand and weeds. The lumps stretch out into the distant haze, an uncountable number, disappearing into the distance. We cannot fathom how many, how. I'll just skip ahead to the end. This book sort of circles back on itself a lot, but this is the chorus again, looking back from 8 years distance at the same events, if you'll bear with me. All we want to do is sleep, but when we lie down, we can't get comfortable. We keep thinking about the pressure of gases under the ground, boiling like water, lifting us up in our beds. You have ideas for where you live, like you do for your children. You promise them safe, ordinary lives, better than your own perhaps, but not too different. It's those dogs, the howling. That's why we can't sleep. Like something ancient, something animal, seeping up through the ground below us. The last time the dogs howled like that, it was after the sea. We can't stop wondering what it means, what they know that we don't. Whatever it is, the dogs can't tell us. We sleep in fragments, we wake like falling. Our bodies are loud, they insist on their aches, their coughs and tendernesses, sweats and shivers. Our lungs and hearts are stuck in place. They shout like prisoners. Our bowels rebel, our livers protest, and we wheeze, restless in the grip of air. When the sea went away, when it gave us its dead like an animal's gift dragged to shore, it felt like the end of the world. That was 8 years ago, and the world's still there. In the end, it wasn't so bad. We adapted to it like we were supposed to. We were doing so well. After the worst had passed, it became just another mark, a dash on the rim of a clock face. The hands go round and round, and time doesn't stop. Money doesn't either. Doesn't matter where it comes from, it just flows and flows, finding the low ground, the crevices. Doesn't matter which was real and which was promises, which was dirty and which clean. We're in its river. We move with its logic. Growth, growth, the logic of the world. We're not stupid. We chose what to notice, what to think about, believed what we needed to. We prioritized. We were realistic. We don't want to think about the past. We want to move forward. Time heals all wounds. But now we can't get rid of it. The past and the future, they rush together like tributaries, fan out again as a delta, spread through the world like blood. We exist between emergencies, emergency responses, more emergencies. That's what it's like to be alive. Nobody comes to help until the worst happens, and often not even then. We're lucky. We'll be safe for a while, wherever we're going, until the next wave crashes. We sleep in shallow trenches. We dream of the sea, her old permanent promises, the fresh smell of her, the edge of the world in our nostrils, the taste of salt in our mouths. We could go down and put our feet in the water and listen to her sing to us, something so far beyond the scale of our lives, so alive in its movement, in its mystery. We miss it, and it still hurts that we can't touch it or be held again. That weightless light, too bright, too far, shimmering. This is a grief that goes deep, goes wider than any other. It travels over the horizon and keeps going, circling the wet world until it hits you again from behind. We wake with salt in our mouths. Thank you.
1. Mum and Dad reckoned I always had nothing water. As soon as we stopped the car at the beach, I'd take off, a trail of clothes left in my wake, headed straight into the water. I didn't notice the difference of the cooler waters down here until I was an adult. The water was always a refresher, a relief from baking hot sun and dusty throats. We would swim everywhere: Johanna, Kilcunda, Wonthaggi, 90 Mile Beach, Malakuta, Gunnamatta, Cunha. It was a revelation returning to Malakuta as an adult. I swam at the warm tail end of the East Australia Current, reaching around the southeast corner of the continent, and marvelled at the extreme change to the brisk cold of the waters we would swim just a bit further west. I've always considered myself a saltwater woman, but I grew up in the dank forests of the Dandenongs and now live near Mary Creek on Wurundjeri Beach. 2. Merry Mary, Woiwurrung, or Rocky Place. The creek is a life vein in the pandemic. The tracks are heaving with people. Flocks of school mums take over the paths with their hordes of kids. They run wild after being restricted all day. The overabundance of dole-sized flats disgorge their occupants onto the creek where they picnic, do yoga, play ukuleles, and turn the track traffic into a constant peak hour. Everyone is a runner or a jogger these days, and they commandeer the track like soldiers in combat. It was already unbearable when their foot pounding and air sucking spewed out sweat and halitosis in my path. Now every bastard could well be laden with aerosol corona pathogens and are unhidden weapons of mass destruction. At times I've seen gorgeous local kingfishers down here, but with all this commotion, the animals don't show themselves to me. Historian Tracy Banavana wrote about Wurundjeri elder Billabulari standing in his sovereignty, persuading his people to move to Narri Narri Warren and then walk off when conditions were not as agreed. She was interested in Billabulari and how he advocated for the creeks, which have become the soul-saving veins of lockdown Melbourne. Tracy died way too early before she could write about this. I wonder if these people, dependent on the creek now, will ever know what Billabulari did for their well-being. 3. Blackfellas organise. Elders are fine. They have lived with restrictions before. Activists coordinate mutual aid, care packages of tea and medicinal balms, face masks and food. Cairns Indigenous Art Fair curates an exhibition called Where's Your Permit? And the artists paint about mission life and the restrictions they were subjected to in the service of racism and land grabs. People in the Cape have gone bush until this thing plays out. A chance to slip the confines of white schooling. Young ones are learning on country with their elders, a respite from the caucasity. We laugh at the white folk, those calling themselves sovereign citizens, and how they freak out at the first whiff of containment of their individualism for protection of our collective health. Capitalism has done its job well. 4. White folk down the creek don't know how far 1.5 metres is, or they find me invisible and walk straight into me, or they assume they are entitled to a right of way. Space Invaders. I walk along with my arm outstretched, chanting, 1.5, 1.5, keep your distance, I'm vulnerable. I get the usual mix of responses: shock that they're being told what to do, derisive, or is it nervous laughter, or retaliatory taunts. Stay home if you don't like it and you don't own this space, and go back to where you came from. In other words, crazy black woman walking. I know what they mean. They mean you don't belong here. We have regenerated this with our dogs. What have you done? We've been walking here with our dogs for 5 years. We have every right to it. Only one woman says, yes, of course, sorry. One in, say, 100. And you wonder why we're over it. I take to rambling the suburban streets instead. Less people, harder ground. Still, with the lack of traffic, I can breathe easier. 5. I'm not the first to be at the creek, of course. There were white people here before me, drinking the creek, polluting the creek, their dogs defecating everywhere. All the human hairs hang out. People with dogs who don't keep them in check around other people, not caring that the dogs they kiss on the mouth have been used against black people worldwide. I'm not blaming the dogs, but the memory is in the DNA. 6. The creek/pandemic has exposed a hierarchy of whiteness. In winter, it used to be only the ex-cons down here making camp when their 2 days of motel money ran out after being released, making do until the next dollar. Often their only companions were the road rubbish, oils and petrol washed down storm drains from the Hume Highway, mingling with the stinking dyes and other nameless factory excrement. Then local residents took interest in the creek's restoration, a remediation of sorts. I am grateful, of course, for the transformation from the washing line for highway rubbish back to endemic plants. But sometimes it feels like a curated garden, right plants, landscaped into a European sensibility. The posh neighbourhoods landscape first. I have to swallow my ire, but want the greenies to see the remediation is still on their terms. They have the power to make decisions because they can reside in one place for many years as landowners or secure renters. Meanwhile, blackfellas move further and further out, chasing affordable rent at the mercy of real estate agents and landlords. Then the cyclists invaded, always innocently at first, but have since created a rat run of entitlement as they commute to their rat race jobs in the service of capitalism. Some greenies shake their sticks at them and call them out, finding squashed animals marked with bike tyres on the creek path. 7. I joined Friends of Edgar's Creek 15 years ago. Only black one as far as I know. We planted bial along the eroding creek bank and watered them through the 2006 drought. The trees still look like saplings, and what was a weedy hill behind is now filled with taller wattles and other undergrowth. I went to the Murnong Festival once down on the creek. The festival celebrates the return of the cultivation and harvesting of Murnong, or yam daisy, that yields small tubers that are good tucker. The juries were there, revitalising country with their dance, language and sweat. The people were warm, inviting and respectful. They served me a kangaroo kebab with roasted Murnong and a warrigal greens pesto. Yummo. 8. A while back now, my sister and I started a ceremony of sorts, an observance. When our great auntie Sadie died, we were unable to travel to her funeral to show our respect, reaffirm our family ties, swap stories, old and new, and meet the next generation of our wide-reaching family tree. So to grieving kinship, we went down to the creek. We lit a candle, reminisced about great Auntie Sandy, to Auntie Sadie about what she meant to us and placed flowers in the creek. The creek flows into the Birrarung, into the bay, into the sea, where the water connects back to Auntie Sadie's place of rest in Bundjalung country. The day our dad died, my sister and I went down to the creek. We lay on the rocks in the wide part of the solidified lava flow so we could be close to the sound of the rushing water, which drowned out the city sounds and washed away the surreal day of rushed flights and strange hospital waves. It was the start of Warren season and the water was low from coming out of summer, but it was there. The sound washed over my sore and overtired eyes and the sun warmed my neck. We stayed a while. 9. The Victorian government reported the 2019-2020 Black Summer bushfires burnt 1.39 million hectares of crucial forests, animal habitats and water catchments in Victoria. In 2018, the Greens said Vic Forest, the state government-owned logging company, is logging 4 mcg's worth of native forest a day. Recently, Vic Forest claims of regeneration required before the country is handed back to the people after logging have been found to be untrue. Regeneration means handing the country back like for like, not just one tree for every tree taken, but the same mix of trees that were there in the first place. Stands of mountain ash, a tree with very high carbon sequestration levels, a decade later are either more populated with wattle or still devoid of trees. How can one part of government publish a report on the alarming loss of habitat while another part is illegally depleting forests in a way in which it will never recover? I talked to students about logging of old growth forests in Toolangi State Forest. It is part of the water catchment for Melbourne, which is only an hour's drive away. Most don't know where their drinking water comes from. My university, on Wurundjeri country, has a focus on planetary health and a commitment to protecting country. I don't know what they are doing to support Wurundjeri's call to protect Warburton Ranges and the Toolangi State Forest, to stop logging old growth forests for the carbon sequestration, but also to protect our drinking water. 10. I catch up with Wurundjeri and Dja Dja Wurrung curator Stacey Piper about the exhibition Willembeek, Woiwurrung for Home Country. She talks about the water lines that connect Wurundjeri Beak to the artists in the show. Water from the high country that flows through to the Birrarung, to Naarm, the Dungala, Barker and Colletti. The water in my bones sings of these rivers. It recalls all the times I've drank from, swam in, fished from, canoed down, played in these waters, and know my gratitude is not enough. These waters constitute me. So I must do what its relatives who can speak for it say to do. Look after the land, look after the people.
Well, I feel very privileged and very lucky to be here tonight to share this stage with such wonderful writers. I'm moved and affected by your work and thrilled to be here with you. In the spirit of investigating and perhaps celebrating Southern waters, I'm going to read to you from the opening chapters of a novel in progress titled Welcome to Fordlandia, which is set mainly in Henry Ford's 1927 utopian rubber tree plantation in the Amazon basin. This was before synthetic rubber was invented, and so Ford wanted to secure a supply line of natural rubber for his factories and his automobile production. So he built a plantation as well as what he considered a stereotypical American town in the middle of the jungle. And as you might imagine, things did not go super well. This story is told by Jack 7 decades later in Michigan, and we begin with a quote from J.M. Barrie's Peter Pan. I have often, said Smee, noticed your strange dread of crocodiles. Not of crocodiles, Hook corrected him, but of that crocodile. He lowered his voice. It liked my arm so much, Smee, that it has followed me ever since, from sea to sea and from land to land, licking its lips for the rest of me. On the morning my mother bled to death on the banks of the Tappahoe, I was nearly a mile away scrubbing stains from a blue cotton pillowcase in Henry Ford's 100-bed sanatorium, that bright white building of glass and mortar jutting like a new tooth from the green gums of the jungle. Even now, the sight of a pig Brussels scrub brush or the sharp whiff of dial tightens the knot of my heartstrings and takes me back to those final moments I missed. My mother rising from the shaded water, skin pale despite the Amazonian sun, golden hair pulled back, and that red frilled two-piece the dock workers pretended not to notice each time she let her robe slip from her shoulders before a swim. Only this time, when she emerged from the water, she was missing her left arm from the elbow down. And by the time the men who were still not watching had clocked the score and leapt into the river to pull her out, the water had turned red and she was so deep in shock, she couldn't form sentences. Now that I've been back in Michigan for so many decades, it's difficult to explain how such a thing could have happened, never mind what the place was like. I know my grandson thinks of my personal history as a story or folktale. Why shouldn't he? You can't smell the leaf rot after each seasonal flooding, the fish tank reek of each tributary as they dried and islands formed, nor the utter cacophony of parrot and monkey chatter from the palm and rubber trees. So how could you imagine his great-grandmother dying on the sand and grass beneath that giant sign, blue paint on white, that read, without any intended irony or foreboding, "Welcome to Fordlandia." So in the wake of this tragedy, Jack's father goes a bit mad and becomes obsessed with the Cayman who killed his wife, Jack's mother, and we learn more about the settlement of Fordlandia. So picture this: asphalt streets cutting through swaths of overhanging pines and vine-wreathed orange trees, glossy red fire hydrants at intervals, and row after row of white picket-fenced bungalows with red-tiled roofs and garden plots bearing orchids, lime trees, and the largest lima beans you've ever seen. After a few weeks, you stop hearing the thudding of coconuts on the streets, stop smelling the kerosene fires from the cleared hills, stop mistaking each twisted branch or tendril for a pit viper, like the one that turned Sully the cook's ankle black and swollen around 2 tiny puncture wounds. In the mornings, mist drifts off the river and mingles with smoke from breakfast fires, and the treetops along the river disappear in gray, wispy fingers. Above it all looms the giant white water tower, stamped with the company logo in blue, our very own protectorate, brother to Christ over Rio 1,000 miles north in the same country, constructed and blessed during those same years. It's easy now to see the tower as a symbol of the opposite, a colossal portent out of place in the depths of Amazonia. Maybe if we'd read the signs correctly, my mother would have survived Fordstown. My father wouldn't have set out after the black cayman that took her arm, and with it his mother's silver wedding band. Half the town's men went with him on that first day, rifles over shoulders and sticks of dynamite to raise the hiding monster in the murky surface of the riverbed. But each time they shot a scaled, sharp-toothed reptile of the right size, hauled it onto the riverbank and sliced it open from gullet to tail, they found the same intestinal mess of fish and tiny mammals. No arm, no ring. When I imagine my mother's arm in the belly of the cayman, I picture it wrong way around. elbow joint towards the stomach, hand facing the teeth, as if the arm has not been consumed, controls the creature like a puppet. A few days later, Jack, worried for his father, follows him upriver in a canoe. The paddle's wooden handle had been worn smooth by use, and the water lay calm despite the rains, the work easy enough in such a light vessel. I'd not ventured north of the rubber saplings before, and I recall a sense of wonder at the vines and canopy hanging over the small finger of the Tapaho, which was itself only an arm of the sweeping Amazon. Monkeys leapt overhead, crossing the water with ease, and giant spiders' webs shattered rays of sunlight into sparkling shards on the water's surface, which rippled with the movement of fish and reptile. And then before me, a small island of tangled root and fern, and one clean trunk stretching to the canopy. And high up that gray-barked tree, above the floodline, a wooden shelf, its sharp lines and corners utterly foreign to the jungle, and upon it a row of porcelain dolls, tiny eyes staring down at me as I drifted, mouth agape. It was as if a child's toy shelf had fallen from the sky and come to rest intact. The dolls condemned to watch the passing of the river and those upon it through glass eyes, even as their fabric dresses rotted and mildewed, sprouting fungi and lichen, and their gleaming bodies caught arrows of the morning sun. Jack continues to paddle and comes across an array of creatures and characters, including a Confederate American family who fled south after the Civil War. Finally, his paddle catches a caiman underwater, and he panics, capsizing his canoe, but is rescued by his father and drags him ashore. "Let's dry you out," he said. "You smell that? Tapper smoke." I sniffed the air, but could only smell the lost penny tang of the coppery river water. We stole through the late morning along a well-worn path away from the river beneath the ancient canopy, and I dizzied myself staring upwards at the filtered, insect-full beams of light, the flutter hush of 1,000 pairs of brightly colored wings, the ferns growing on outstretched branches, roots and vines hanging from such a seemingly sourceless height, it looked as if they had fallen straight down, frozen midair. There was a world far above the earth at my feet, strata I'd never properly considered, its population levitated by the giant bones of the old growth, walking palms, rubber trees, Ngurahui. And now that the jungle was properly awake, it seemed oddly less loud, perhaps because individual sounds were dulled by the constant buzzing of insects and the clicking of beak-encased tongues. To this day, when I close my eyes and remember, the air vibrates before me with the wings of heliconius butterflies, orange and yellow, brushing my ears and alighting on the bridge of my nose and at the corners of my eyes, drawn to the moisture. As Jack and his father walk through the jungle, they find a rubber tapper's thatch hut and a pregnant woman in serious trouble, ready to deliver a loan. Rubber tappers were and are essentially a vast network of indentured slaves who collect sap from rubber trees, which grow very, very far apart naturally. They cook the sap over the open fires and roll into these giant balls, which they deliver via river to Brazilian or foreign agents for processing and sale. Evening falls, and Jack's father tries to help the pregnant woman, leaving Jack alone outside. I began to lose my bearings next to that fire and amidst the cries from the hut, and my spirit shivered from my bones to moil through the soggy riverland, unanchored, haunted and haunting, until, as if in response to my dizzy hunger and exhaustion, another cry emanated from the hut, small and cracked, toy-like, a doll's voice squawking for its mother. My father emerged then, holding a wrap bundle, and I thought for a moment he was bringing the crying child to show me, until I clocked his ashen face in the firelight and the sticky blood up to his elbows, and, as he moved in and out of the fire's wavering shadow, another tiny cry rattled from the hut. "Twins," he murmured softly. "The girl's fine." He paused and cast his eyes around the site, perhaps trying to decide what to do with the stillness in his arms. The bundle was unwrapped on one side, revealing half of an infant's closed face, blue even in the flickering light, and missing an opening where its mouth should have been, the skin sealed over both nostrils and lips, giving the newborn the appearance of an aquatic creature of some nature, an Amazonian river nymph, though my father did not let me gaze upon the poor creature for long enough to discern whether or not it had gills or webbed fingers and toes. Did this child's deformities mark the workings of some ancient curse that ran through our river of doubt? And if so, in what ways had this family transgressed? I thought of Fordlandia, of our insistence that we belong there, and of the deep workings of this place upon us. Perhaps we were all cursed now, had all sinned and fallen short of some unspoken set of commandments, rules forged not by the flame-wreathed hands of God upon Sinai for Moses, but in the watery crucible of Amazonia. Thou shalt not submerge thy hands in, nor bathe beside the banks of the Tapajos at dusk. Thou shalt honor the sharp-toothed reptilian custodians of silt and mangrove root. Thou shalt make blood sacrifices to the green vines, dripping palm ferns, and cannibal flora. My father wrapped the dead infant tightly in the blood-stained cloth covering the deformed face, and I found myself wondering if I had a twin also, a brother or sister that did not survive the savagery of childbirth. In my imagination, my sibling arrived not without a mouth, but without eyes to see, a blindness that protected them from even the smallest glimpse of what could have been their home and family. I still worry about my brother or sister, that tiny specter crying out in the darkness of Michigan winter nights, unable to see me awake also, my wrinkled frame wrapped in sheets and curled fetally, murmuring spells into the frost-covered window panes, in the hopes that the lonely child might find my mother's spirit and be comforted by her one-armed touch, despite the all-encompassing blues and blacks of their unsight. The rubber tapper returns to the hut then and takes the wrapped stillborn boy back into the hut. And Jack and his father listen to the man and woman singing goodbye. Despite the distraction of the smell of blood and afterbirth emanating from my father's hands and arms, which he dared not clean in the river, I love that the tapper recognized the need to properly ritualize and verbalize their parting with the twin that could have been, that the tiny ghost might pass easily to a place of rest and soft light, that its lips might be unsealed at the hands of some true creator, far from the hardships of rubber tapping in the Amazon, that the short memory of this goodbye would be haunting enough to satisfy the hunger of the lost one whose sealed mouth could not latch upon his mother's breast, and enough to release this tiny family from a life of restless apparitions and shadows torn at the seams. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. We're lucky to have Matthew Hooton with us, and tonight we're very lucky to have the first tantalizing glimpses of this amazing work, and to be taken to that extraordinary and disturbing world of the Amazon River long ago. Our next reader is Rachel Mead, and please, I'll say no more. I'm not introducing people, but I'm guessing that Rachel will take us somewhere very different. Please welcome Rachel.
Yes, it's such an honour to have been invited. So thank you so much, Mandy. And yeah, I'm so honoured to be among so many phenomenal writers. So thank you. I'm going to read some poems that are both watery and thirsty. So the first one that I'll read is based in Rarotonga in the Pacific. The mind-body binary on holiday. What does the body know as the mind idles, nipping at itself? Tucked behind my book, I leave my lips moist fossil printed on the cup's rim. The sea rolls its tongue over the reef while clouds shape themselves to a horizon so encompassing it feels elemental. Behind the crash and bleed of the waves, green is losing its charm in this blue world. And as the terns arrived from some uncharted distance, their bodies angled to elsewhere, I feel at home owning only these travellers' clothes and the steady morse of this mainland pulse. Wrapped in ocean, I weigh only as much as a full human heart. Being underwater is much like love. The anxiety, everything just a little out of control. Visibility is poor, and what lies beyond sight will either be wonderful or the death of you. Of course, it's irresistible. Full and empty, the ocean catches me in pulsing nets of sun. I float, weary from holding back the tides of breath. So much of us is saline after all. At last, ready to retrace evolution, I balance myself against its steady mechanics, refill the space between heart and lung, and let the ocean wear away my edges. All day I've built my life, and now the rising dark comes to drown it. Sun-warm basalt nestles me as the last light caramelizes over the horizon. The sea is a great beast, sighing and rolling as it bears its dark belly to the stars. Boys leap, hooting and yelling off the black rocks. Birds are dark slashes on the sky, while insects orbit me like electrons. Order yields to chaos at the place where clouds fall. Looking out over the avenues of waves, I'm a detached witness to the sky's outrage at endings. And just as I gather myself to give up, still crowded with the difficulty of what it is to be, freedom surges, rising like nitrogen in my blood. This is what the body knows. The next two poems are taken from a poem sequence that was based on a trip to Kaditanda Lake Eyre when the basin was in flood. So this, the lake. There's nothing there. Oh, look, sorry, before I start, you probably need to know, sorry, that this is all to do with an optical illusion that happens when at a certain time of day when the lake is in flood and the sky is perfectly reflected in the waters and there's no wind. Okay, now, sorry, start again. There's nothing there. No horizon, water and sky melded seamless. From solidity, the ground begins to give and we crack through crust, our steps leaden with mud, holding us to the earth. The shallow sea has frozen into salt, ripples, the fossils of its final tide turned into tiny tectonic continents, rims grinding with crystalline crepitus. Water oozes up until our steps float, and then we are ankle deep in sky, no up, no down, the air no longer a ceiling. Our arms flap for balance, and we are flying in the lake, swimming in sky. There is no edge, just here. And this second one is called Kaditanda, and it's I was very lucky to be able to take a flight. So this is the aerial view of the landscape in flood. Preserved against the salty page, the plain's shadow glides like a pelican, full-bellied on a thermal. The land below is abstract art, a canvas on a geological scale. I use the camera to slice the overwhelming down into bearable portions. The Arabana, so intimate with this shape that they could look down, render it into ochre and charcoal, feet never leaving the earth, while I choke on this vastness, even as it unrolls a full-scale map beneath me. Such ancient knowledge senses the change long before it shivers the heads of grass, and like the tumblers of a lock clicking open, the door swings wide, the waters arrive. For us, the mystery remains. We wait for the forecasts, computer models, portents of La Nina to tell us when the basin will brim once more. The water winks in the low sun, knowing but not telling. So now a couple more recent ones, and these are the thirsty ones. So this one was written on Paramount land where I live, and yeah, on the title says it all: catastrophic fire danger level 6. These days are the worst kind of extraordinary, blunt as mirrors. It's not the heat, it's the wind. The ruthless air scrapes the house, honing itself as it passes. The tubs are stacked by the door, passports, poetry, our history glued in albums. The dig tree leaf Andrew gave me in our first week. Frames hold flares of light. January reels beyond the glass. I prime the pumps. Today, I'm climate clickbait, peering out from inside the news. I scan the blue for smoke. Plants, words, thoughts all crackle to dust in this catastrophic light. The axis of the earth shifts. These ranges now the centre of the world. Leaves glare like blades. This day feels long as a life, bloated with its full share of tea, dread and tedium. The throb of old losses fades. I fear only what can still be lost. Green aches in the light. I scan the edges of air like ticking my thumb over the plastic comfort of a rosary. Then, at last, that gleaming hour when the veranda posts and perennials are webbed with an alien beauty. The trees and house sink in clotted shadow while the troposphere is empty with blue. Birds are scraps of ash circling in hot plumes of sky. Standing in my sweat, I dream of drizzle and overcoats, the slow shuffle of waves, the chill mineral gaze of stars. Okay, and this one is another thirsty one. And it begins with a quote from John Cage. I have nothing to say and I am saying it, and that is poetry. 5 seasons without rain, the cold south wind at our backs. We walk the creek bed, stones chiming beneath our feet. We are learning to walk the ancient way, quietly, shoulders loose, skimming the earth until the soles of our feet have ears. I see you and sense that you see me, your eyes inland seas in the desert. We lean into conversations, clasping wine in hands that only brush once. It felt solid, but those words were just a flash flood through arid land. Our past lay deep below, millennia of strata laid down and buckling from primeval tensions. Our exposed surfaces sculpted by eons of weather into this fleeting formation. It's the archaeologist in me to want everything laid bare. Now I'm back in my ordinary happiness, and just like that, I've blown it, failing to grasp how easily words create silence. But on clear nights, I'll spin warm fictions from these spare stars, my ears straining the quiet for your voice. Rain brushes my cheek. And back for my final poem, Back to the Sea, somewhere. Don't worry, I'm not reading all of these. This is it. And this is the sound of the Anthropocene York Peninsula. I've driven from a place of edges and endings to this cold winter shore, where the line slicing water from sky is nothing but softness. A bird blacks a hole in the grey, and the sea is so still, only gull legs and wing flap ripple the glass. I leave footprints in the sand, mistakes the sea will erase with no uncertainty, reminding me at last and again why I'm in love with the wild. People, not so much. The houses jostle, this beach, the thin partition between worlds, the deep ocean currents and the tireless germination of human things. I dig for the earth's elegant fierceness, this poem a fossil pressed within the stratigraphy of my notebook. A black and white dog escorts me to the point. Her place, not mine. A flock of egrets gaggle, some flying out over the water, clapping wings above low bellies. The dog brings me a sea rock, drops it at my feet with a clatter of tooth on stone. The sand is a welter of toe prints, a crackly mosaic of shell. Each step gives a satisfying crunch, even though it is the sound of the earth cracking beneath my weight. Thanks.
Rachel, it's wonderful to hear those poems, such generosity of feeling and attention to the world and such artistry of language. Thank you. Zooming in from France, good morning, Tara.
Thank you so much for the Ghana welcome, Rosemary. I wish I was there in person. It's been so beautiful to hear Rachel and Matthew and Jennifer and Lucy, and especially Kim. Kim's piece was just stunning. When I grew up on Darul country and Yun country on the south coast, and we were really lucky to have this housing commission house that was 100 meters from the ocean. And so much I've written about has been about that healing nature of salt water. But from this distance, the whole of the country is that seed of home, is those southern waters. So I'm just going to read a little from my novel. I was born on Nurembang. Can you hear it? New, rum, bang. If you say it right, it hits the back of your mouth, and you should taste blood in your words. Every person around should learn the word for country in the old language, the first language, because that is the way to all time, to time travel. You can go all the way back. My daddy was Buddy Gondawindi, and he died a young man by the hands of a bygone disease. My mother was Augustine, and she died an old woman by the grip of, well, it was an old world disease too. Yet nothing ever really dies. Instead, it all goes beneath your feet, beside you, part of you. Look there, grass on the side of the road, tree bending in the wind, fish in the river, fish on your plate, fish feeding you. Nothing is ever gone. Soon, when I change, I won't be dead. I always memorized John 11:26, whoever lives and believes in me shall never die, yet life rushed through and past me as it will for each person. Before I believed everything they taught me, I thought when all were dead that all were gone. And so, as a young fella, I tried to find my place in this short life. I only wanted to decide for myself how I'd live it, but that was a big ask in a country that had a plan for me, already mapped in my veins since before I was born. The one thing I thought I could control was my own head. It seemed the most sensible thing to do was to learn to read well. So in a country where we weren't really allowed to be, I decided to be, to get water from the stones, you see. After I met my beautiful wife, although beauty was the least of her, strong and fearless was the most of her. Well, she taught me lots of things. Big thing, best thing she taught me was to learn to write the words too. Taught me I wasn't just a second-rate man raised on white flour and Christianity. It was my wife, Elsie, who bought me the first dictionary. I think she knew she was planting a seed, germinating something inside me when she did that. What a companion the dictionary is. There are stories in that book that'll knock your boots off. To this day, it remains my prized possession, and I wouldn't trade it for all the tea in China. The dictionary from Elsie is why I'm writing it down. It was my introduction to the idea of recording, written just like the Reverend once wrote the births and baptisms at the mission, like the station manager wrote rations at the station, and just like the ma'ams and masters wrote our good behaviour at the boys' home, a list of words any fool can look up and be told the meaning. A dictionary, even if this language isn't mine alone, even if it's something we grow into and then, living long enough, shrink away from. I am writing because the spirits are urging me to remember. because the town needs to know that I remember. They need to know now more than ever before. To begin, but there are too many beginnings for us Gondawindi. That's what we were bestowed and cursed with by the same shifty magic and eternal once upon a time. The story goes that the church brought time to us, and the church, if you let it, will take it away. I'm writing about the other time though, deep time. This is a big, big story. The big stuff goes forever. Time ropes and loops and is never straight. That's the real story of time. The problem now facing my own once upon a time is that Dr. Shah from the High Street Surgery has recently given me a filthy bill of health, cancer of the pancreas, which is me done and dusted. So, because they say it is urgent, because I've got the church time against me, I'm taking pen to paper to pass on everything that was ever remembered, all the words I found on the wind. Yarran tree, spearwood tree, or hickory, acacia, yarrani. The dictionary is not just words. There are little stories in those pages too. After years with the second great book, I figured out the best way to read it. First time, I went in like reading the Bible, front to back. AA words first. There you find Aaron and him in the book of Exodus, brother of Moses, founder of Jewish priesthood. Aardvark, that animal with a tube nose that eats the ants of Africa. There are abbreviations too, like AA, Alcoholics Anonymous, where people go to heal from the bottle. That punched me in the guts. My mummy, she said, the Aborigine is a pity, my son. She said, everyone was always insulted by her no matter what she did. So she let herself do the most insulting thing she could think of. Take the poison they brought with them and go to town. You could keep reading the dictionary that way, front to back, straight as a dart. Or you could get to Aardvark and then skip to Africa, then skip to continent, then skip to nations, then skip to colonialism, then skip over to empire, then back to apartheid in the A section. That happened in South Africa, another story. When I was on the letter W in the Oxford English Dictionary, Wire would be in that section. It means no. Wire wasn't there though, but I thought I'd make it there. Wheat was there, but when I skipped ahead, not our word for wheat, not Yura. So I thought I'd make my own list of words. We don't have the Z word in our alphabet, I reckon. So I thought I'd start backwards and nod to the backwards whitefella world I grew up in. Started Y, Yarrani. So that is the once upon a time for you. Say it, Yarrani. It is our word for spearwood tree. And from it, I once made a spear in order to kill a man.
Thank you so much, Tara, for those words and that eloquence. It was beautiful. And thank you for writing from your southern place on the south coast and from deep time. That brings to an end tonight's readings. It's been a really top lineup of writers. And we thank you all. Lucy Traore, Jennifer Mills, Kim Kruger, Matthew Hooton, Rachel Mead, and Tara June Winch. And that brings to an end. And Jennifer again. But yes, that brings to an end the proceedings of a long 3 days. And a last thank you to the organisers of this whole thing, Meg Samuelson and Mandy Tregus. Thanks to ASAL, and thanks to Theo and Madeline and Maggie and all of the helpers and supporters. Good night.